Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Perfect. They can hear me? Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Hook. I'm a community events manager here at Factory Berlin. We're providing the platform for the event today. If you haven't heard of Factory, we are a curated community of over 3,000 creators and innovators, all international. We bring together startups, corporates, artists, and entrepreneurs, all based in Berlin. These individuals are the most creative, entrepreneurial, and ambitious people that we can find who support and empower each other. And we bring them together using our events program, some events happening online like this one, and our two campuses, one in Berlin-Kreuzberg, one in Berlin-Mitte, and finally digital tools to help people connect. We have one relevant event for you coming up. Actually, we have many relevant events coming up, but there's one I'd just like to share. So we have our Futures Forum coming up on May 13th. If this event interests you, then please check out that information. It would also be interesting to you as well. Now I will just very quickly intro the tools that we're going to use today for this event. So if I can just change my screen. Is it working? Perfect. So we are going to use Sli.do today for the Q&A section. The event code is Covid-19 climate change. So you can go ahead and go onto Sli.do if you have any questions that you want to share. You can also speak to us using the YouTube live chat on the right hand of your screen, and we'll share those informations over to the Sli.do. So finally, to introduce this event, so this event is going to speak about the economic and environmental threats and opportunities created by COVID-19. It will be hosted by Lubomila Jordanova, who is the founder of Plan A, which is a startup from our network who's been with us for the last 2 years. They are also the first, have created the first emission reduction software, which allows businesses to calculate, monitor, and offset their carbon footprint. So with that, I just would like to pass off the mic to Lubomila. Thank you so much. Lubomila, are you ready? Have created the first emission reduction software.
Always. Hi. How's everyone doing being at home and stuck in the setup of unknown and unfamiliar office territory that is organized without actually, us being really prepared for this. I'm saying hi from my home in Berlin. I'm here kind of, doing as everyone else, just being really focused on making sure I maximize my time by engaging myself with activities like work predominantly, but also sometimes a bit of puzzle and a bit of walking around, jogging. Today we're going to talk about coronavirus and climate change. I think that all of us have been focusing a lot of our time on understanding better what this virus actually stands for and kind of connecting it to the existing realities that we've had from before. But one thing that we have forgotten in our discussions is the fact that climate change, this bigger wave of challenges that is ahead of us, is also, one that deserves a lot of attention and one that deserves a lot of focus. And the long-term aspect of this discussion and the repercussions that are ahead of us are equally as bad, if not even more severe, than in comparison to what we should anticipate going further from the coronavirus crisis. So what am I going to speak about today? I'm going to tell you a bit more about climate change, status of today, what has been happening over the last few weeks in terms of changes. but also I would like to share with you a different perspective, one that talks about how do the two realities of climate change and COVID-19 correlate, or is there a meeting point between the two, and what are the lessons we can learn from them? So let me share my screen so I can share with you also a beautiful presentation. One second. And I encourage you all in the link, wherever you're watching this, please put some questions. Sli.do has been already mentioned to all of you. But yeah, please share with you your ideas. And even if you want to, speak up, get going immediately as you have a thought. And we're going to take all these questions one after the other after I'm done with the short presentation. And finally, something that is really very much in the Plan A style is that we've been talking to a lot of people from our community, and we have been hearing that there's a lot of loneliness going on at the moment, and people finding it quite challenging to adapt to this sitting at home setup and being quite limited in terms of the activities that you do today and for the last few weeks. So please also let us know how you've been feeling. One thing that is not discussed enough, there's been all these posts on LinkedIn and all these posts on different social medias that explains to us how we can make our home more pleasant and more applicable to remote work, but there's very little discussion about the emotional side of the story. So please also share how you feel about this, and potentially we can find a way connect to one another and find ways to obviously answer the big questions that are sitting on the agenda at the moment. So let's get going with a bit of a presentation. I hope all of you see my screen. I am now going to turn into full mode. So what is the agenda for today? We're going to be focusing on the coronavirus status, climate change status, and then one issue versus the other, or hopefully we'll all agree by the end of it that there's plenty actually of connecting points between the two. And then I would like to touch upon the opportunities and the risks that are lying ahead of the environmental topic, but also of the economical topic. And then we'll have a nice discussion. So, what is the coronavirus crisis? A lot of you, I'm sure, have been noticing that there's been a lot of things changing in our environment. People in Germany are living definitely a different life than people in France, or in places where the restrictions are incredibly severe, including China a few months ago. But the coronavirus crisis is essentially touching upon every single space of our planet, more or less, and has now led to quite unfortunate statistics that only that are hitting across Europe. Europe is kind of the epicenter of what is going on, with unfortunate hubs such as Italy, Spain, France, and the UK, which is increasingly becoming prominent in all the news related to COVID. These statistics that you see on the left are from a few hours ago. I just checked before we joined in today, actually what is happening in the world. And unfortunately, now we have passed the 1.9 million mark in terms of people that have been affected by coronavirus. There's, of course, like a lot of cases of recovery, but unfortunately, there's also close to 200,000 people that have died from coronavirus. So I know that I'm probably repeating for many of you something that is familiar to all of to many, but coronavirus kind of started in China, in Wuhan, in a market that was selling a lot of rare species. Why this is important to mention is because now we're starting to kind of get closer to the climate change topic, and it is important to remember that we have started entering spaces on this planet which are not for humans, that are not related to our activities, but our wish to be the ever-existing managers of this environment have essentially connected us to an opportunity to be quite aggressive in our approach to get to these places. So this virus came through animals, and it's still, a lot of good things happen from this, which actually are related to policy. I'll speak about this in a second, but I want to leave you with this thought, and also I want to hear your comments about this, because some prominent speakers, especially about economy, go against the idea that we should not touch every single space on this planet. But obviously the plan A and my particular opinion are quite different. So these are the statistics from today. What we can think about in terms of the repercussions in our day-to-day is the activities that have been related to fighting the pandemic. So, of course, we all know about the social distancing. It applies to different places in different ways. It is 1.5 meters distance. It's related to 2 meters in some countries. One thing that I found quite interesting that I learned a few days ago is that if you are running, so if you're jogging, the social distancing has to be 5 meters. If you're cycling, it has to be 20 meters because of the path of air you create while moving so fast, depending on how good of a runner you are, I guess. But, it's certain that the distance increases as your, speed increases. Testing, massive. Well, to the extent that you can access tests. In Berlin, I've heard horrendous cases where people have been waiting for 9 hours to actually get a test. New York at the moment is the epicenter of the trauma in the US, and testing is totally impossible there. There's been a lot of backlash by people that are famous that have claimed that they're not testing positive or testing positive, and due to the fact that they have had the privilege to access these tests. As you know, places like the US don't have a very stable healthcare system, and people that cannot afford to pay insurance are totally excluded from the system. So essentially, they have ended up maybe not even being able to be tested. Europe Solidarity has been one of the very positive movements related to this crisis. I'm sure all of you, or at least many of you, have heard at 7 p.m. in Berlin and across Germany. For those of you that maybe come from Spain, this has been happening. I know from friends of mine in Barcelona and in Madrid, in all of the biggest cities in Spain as well. Italy, there's been serenades, there's been opera concerts happening to say thank you to all of these health workers that have been there for us without any, question whether their mission is aligned to anything different than basically being there for societies. Another aspect of the Euro Solidarity has been related to startups. I don't know how many of you follow the startup industry in detail, but there's been some phenomenal innovation coming out related to creating new devices for hospitals, creating respiratory devices that essentially allow for these shortages to be compensated. There's been masks that I have a friend that she's phenomenal, one of the sustainable fashion startups in Berlin. She basically stopped all of her activities and focused on producing masks that she's giving out for free for people that are looking for them. Vaccines and treatment. So at the moment, there's 70 vaccines that have been passing the first 2 stages. 4 of them are at the final stages of being approved, but keep in mind that this is not a straightforward process. What this means is basically that you can be rejected even at the latest point. It's just a matter of, being aligned with the process, but also following really strictly what the precautions are. But one thing that was fascinating about vaccines I read this morning is that if one of these 4 vaccines gets to be approved at the moment, within the next few weeks, this would prove all of the understanding that we have in terms of processes for vaccines wrong, because it would shorten by 3 to 5 times the length of the normal process that we would see, which is phenomenal. And it shows that once we're connected to one another and to a universal mission, we can actually get a lot of work done effectively. Treatments have been, quite experimental, I would say. Been a lot of things that have been applied across the world and tested. There's been a lot of experiments in terms of, whether existing vaccines can be used, whether, certain medicine should be used. For example, paracetamol was considered to be really bad. I was reading a New York Times article a few weeks ago. So yeah, wildlife protection. So I mentioned this earlier a few seconds ago. This has been one of the incredibly positive outcomes of this whole discussion. And I am, I need to make this remark because I'm sure all of you, or at least many of you these days, are watching some streaming services. For those of you that watch, Tiger King, which is unfortunately it exploded on over the internet over the last few weeks. This is the kind of content that shows you that we need a lot of wildlife protection activities. This, for those of you that don't know, is a documentary that is quite, I don't even know how to describe it, mind-blowing, disheartening, crazy, about a zoo in the US. I'm not going to go into details, but the final statistics with which the whole movie ends up, solely spoiler alert, is that there's 4,000 tigers in the wildlife, in the wild, and between 5 to 10,000 in households in the US. So this is something that proves to you that maybe we need some work on that side. And how is this related to the pandemic? Well, as I mentioned earlier, how this whole crisis started was through wildlife. We've entered spaces that we should not be part of. And one thing that has come out as a positive result is that there's a few states in China which have now banned, for example, eating cats and dogs. That's not wildlife, but it's still, animal rights. Another one has been about sales of leather, sales of skin. And then the other one was about sales of actually animals, live animals, that a lemur should not be in a cage. A lemur should be in Madagascar, not doing anything in China. And some footage from Wuhan actually was showing these kinds of species that are very particular for a particular geography. So there has been some positive results, but definitely not at the scale where we want them to be. Well, so what is the status on the climate change front? So the Paris Agreement has been widely discussed over the last few months, and in terms of progress, in terms of the fact that certain big countries have not been following the guidelines. SDGs are becoming more prominent in discussions, but I would say in a more biased or in a more how can I say, qualitative way. The quantitative aspect of the discussion is still missing, and this is what is really challenging for many of us, and definitely for the team of Plan A, in terms of how we appreciate the progress that has been done. The second aspect that is really powerful, and this is where actually Plan A works really actively with organizations like Bitkom in Germany, and with other organizations that can push on the policy side some positive changes, has been the Green New Deal for Europe. So for those of you that don't know, this has been really stringent and very detailed, and for the first time really clear picture on how Europe is going to move to a carbon tax, how is Europe going to move towards decarbonization on a grand level. And these agendas have been set really well by the new commissioner, and she has been, really, Ursula von der Leyen has been incredibly open about her commitment to climate change and her concern. The one thing to keep in mind when we talk about this is that, of course, when you look at a political agenda, you always have to combine the different stakeholders and the different opinions that would have to be calculated, because you might be the biggest prominent and most prominent speaker about sustainability, but what you surely have to consider is the economic state of the country. We all know what has been happening with regards to the massive funds that have come from the German government, from the EU, and now, there's also, a lot happening on the EU level, on the EU surface. One news that came out today that I find also really interesting, and I think it's, at least for me, it gives me a sense of hope, is that 10 of the EU members, so 10 out of 27, have signed an agreement, and kind of it's basically an open letter that has been sent now to the European Commission. Countries include Netherlands, it includes Lithuania, Portugal, Spain, requesting that this economic crisis that potentially is going to be ahead of us would actually be this opportunity where we end up setting the scene in an environmentally friendly manner, setting the scene in a manner that is sustainable. And for me, this is something that, at this prime moment, when numbers are slowly slowing down and kind of, decreasing with regards to cases, it's still too painful to imagine that, the economy would be already thinking about how to go ahead sustainably. But the discussions are related to, for example, now with all these packages for loans happening and so on, to essentially have some clauses in these loans that say, hey, you get 2 million for your company, but you need to reduce your emissions by 30%. And this is what gives me a lot of hope. And also is something that is really exciting for many, I think, of us. Fridays for Future has moved online, so this is something that maybe many of you know. Greta is definitely not as active online as she used to be, not because she doesn't want to, but because one thing is to have a webinar about COVID-19 and climate change, another thing is to protest online. There's been some interesting movements on that side as well. There's been a few petitions coming out of them, also from a few other organizations. And I think this is really powerful. I think this is really exciting in terms of, having the capacity to spread messages across borders without having to be many numbers outside. I think the protests have been effective also because of the way they looked, the way that you can see these young faces pushing forward an agenda that is showing responsibility for generations ahead and showing maturity of youngsters that is beyond their age. But as we've learned also from our remote work status, it is also possible to do things online. And yeah, they've chosen the online campaigning mode. So global emissions decrease. One thing that I find pretty cool, and I think is not only cool but also great for our planet, is the fact that emissions have been decreasing universally. China reduced and unfortunately is now restarting. The March statistics are quite negative. They already managed to get back to 10% increase of their CO2 emissions, but they managed to decrease by 25% within a quarter their emissions. China, only China. So places like Wuhan, places like a few other of the regions above Wuhan that are quite well known for production were essentially quite clear in terms of, these places visibly changing. So satellite images showing that pollution is kind of diminishing. Unfortunately, and this is going to lead soon to my risks, this is a short-lived success. We have been accumulating emissions and we have been emitting for so many decades that it is really foolish to think that within a few short months we'll be able to compensate to a level where we can comfortably say climate change is not an issue anymore. So now we have a status about coronavirus and climate change. What I think would be nice to be able to talk about is how do we compare the two things at the same time. On one hand, we have climate protection. This is something that in the climate change crisis affects everyone. It needs fast policy changes and it needs global lifestyle changes. And it needs also long-term structural changes and long-term impact changes. When it comes to public health, fighting a battle like the one against COVID-19 that has been so painful for so many governments, I would say that there's a lot of opportunity in terms of us, obviously, improving our healthcare system by swift responses. But the truth is that it has exactly the same kind of characteristics. Bad public health and good public health affects everyone. Quick response within a system allows for everyone to essentially be, protected, and on a grand level for society to have even more economic stability, because a healthy society is a society that can contribute to its own system. Public health requires fast policy changes. The US, for example, has been toying with the idea of reducing the length of vaccine approvals. Same thing has been happening across other places like Switzerland and Germany. And this shows that when we connect, we can actually be a lot more effective. Can you turn around? I want to see you. And then finally, sorry for this, we need short-term structural changes and immediate impact. So let's look at the economic opportunities. What we see is temporary decrease in GHG emissions. This is where the benefit when it comes to climate change is visible. This COVID crisis has stopped us or reduced the quantity of us using public transport. It has also stopped us from moving, in terms of, we're not allowed to see any of our relatives or friends, so we're not traveling anywhere, we're not going anywhere with taxis out for partying, and we're certainly not flying. Companies like EasyJet, Ryanair have fully, and why I'm mentioning them is because I want to share some more info about them as well. They have basically fully, grounded their fleet. And this allows for reduction in CO2 and an opportunity for sustainable energy solutions also to become more visible. The but is obviously there. Can it last? The decrease in GHG emissions, as I mentioned, is something that is a short-lived success. We have an opportunity to, see the positive aspect of empty streets of Berlin, on empty streets of other cities around the world. But what we definitely cannot long-term know is that, and cannot secure, is that GHG emission reduction is going to support also us being, more aligned with our vision to fight climate change. Because what we're fighting when it comes to, decreasing emissions is also embedding a sustainability minded lifestyle. And this is not just happening through A, focusing on emissions, B, focusing only on this short-term success that we have. The second environmental opportunity is related to policy changes. What has been proven by the COVID crisis is that we have a lot of quick response, which once we actually see the need for that. The governments across the world have been able to activate resources, have been able to activate people in a manner that has been quite impressive. So I'll give a few examples. So for those of you that are based in Berlin, you probably have an idea of the IBB setup, where the Berlin Investment Bank gave essentially 15K grants to SMEs if they could prove that their revenues are significantly, reduced by the COVID crisis. I have friends that have taken these loans, and essentially what happened is that you had response from the morning till the evening. This is not the normal way things happen on that scale, and this shows that we can do things really effectively. Airlines and the cruise industry are totally, hit by this moment, this history. And here the question when it comes to policy is that for all the discussions that are happening, for example, in the US and in Europe related to supporting them financially so that they can survive the crisis, can environmental policies not also be embedded in their, in their way of behaving? can you not request from these airlines to 100% offset their emissions? EasyJet, and this is why I was mentioning it, because EasyJet and Ryanair are both supposedly offsetting their emissions and kind of going towards carbon neutrality. There's a lot of question marks there. On the Ryanair website, you basically click something, doesn't show you any organization where the money are going, and you pay €1 for a flight. So, yeah. But can this actually be embedded into their not only product, but into their terms and conditions when someone bails them out of a crisis? And finally, how can you build a preference for industries, for supporting industries in this kind of crisis moments from the governmental perspective, in order to support companies that are actually not only producing products that are used by people, but companies that are actually producing sustainably, or preferring these kinds of companies instead of the carbon intensive ones? Again, a big opportunity, but a big question mark here, because the reality is that we don't know how far we're gonna, be able to get when the focus is on economic growth again. So, the final or kind of another grand aspect of economical and environmental opportunities is related to human behavior change. Each one of you that is listening, I'm assuming from home, has found a way to work from home, hopefully if your job allows this. And we really quickly activated a lot of, tools, a lot of opportunities to be involved in work back again effectively, but without having this constant commute aspect. And so one of the questions that is popping up a lot on all these articles that are being shown on LinkedIn and all these other channels related to remote work is the remote work way gonna last? I have my opinions about this because I miss my team a lot, and I don't think I am gonna stop cycling to factory to not see my team because I prefer to stay at home. I think there's going to be a bounce back. People are going to want to be in their offices a bit more than usual after this happens. But now we're aware of these tools and now we're using them. There's plenty of new startups that popped up, and actually side comment in terms of the second point, which is the online meetings. Startups that have done online conferencing tools have gotten funding of over 50 million just over the last few months. Why? Just because there's an expectation that these kinds of crises are going to happen more. COVID-19 2.0 could be around the corner in a few months' time. There's speculations that there could be a second wave. Climate change in many places is already affecting people's capacity to move. And there's a lot of flood, for example, warnings that are happening at the moment. So yeah, these kinds of tools are here to stay, and investing in this kind of infrastructure also helps. Let's say travel. So for us, it was really interesting. So we work with a company called BCG Digital Ventures. Maybe many of you know them, and with BCG as well. And what was really interesting about the discussions we had with them was that they were saying how it's really interesting to imagine consulting as a job being fully remote, because it's just not part of the way business is done. But when you put in such circumstances, sorry, when you put in such circumstances, you basically end up, having to make the most out of it, because business, maybe not as usual, continues, but business definitely continues, and you need to find ways to work out of it. So, consumption patterns, you can see the infamous toilet paper that became the sign and the signature of the COVID crisis, after shelves were totally emptied out all across the world. And then companies like Edeka posting on their TikTok channel, I don't know if you guys followed that, a massive group of people from their employees, one after the other, lined up with like crowns made out of toilet papers, like bringing the new amount of toilet papers. Here, our designer Edgar has made some nice reference to this. But, there's a really beautiful article, and I don't know if you guys read, guys and girls read 1843. It's a publication by The Economist. It's the quarterly magazine which was really interesting, explaining how the patterns of behavior, the consumption changed all across the world, and how in the UK there was a lot of stocking up of pasta and flour, and then how in France there was a lot of also flour, but wine was obviously being consumed a lot. In Germany, there was a lot of potatoes and a lot of also pickles. And, it shows who we are deep down inside, because, the moment when your soul is touched by some sort of a fearful survival, you end up going back to the roots, going back to like your way of behaving, to the bare minimum, something that the Maslow hierarchy of need maybe can explain better than I do. And obviously, this is maybe not even the right phrasing, decrease in number of physical events, but I would say total elimination of physical events. Factory, our partner in organizing this event, is kind of one of the most prominent actors in Berlin in terms of organizing incredible events for startups, and they fully move their agenda online. And it's really, really phenomenal to see how, totally the behavior changes. It's a lot more about the content rather than about the connection. I've been giving a lot of webinars for the last few weeks, and it's just a different way of being. And that's why I please encourage you to share in your comments how you feel about what's going on, because I want us to have a conversation at the end. I don't want us to be like just a session where I end up finishing my monologue and then we're out. But yeah, this has totally changed the way we work, and I think a lot of people miss this aspect as well. And the question here would be, can we move this momentum to shift for good? What does this mean? Well, it's really easy to now, when we're obstructed, when we're totally limited in our movement, in our behavior, in our consumption, in our visits, to obviously be good, to be sustainable, and to think about these things. But once the economic discussion hits a bit more the agenda, are we going to be as sustainable? Are we just going to start hitting a plane every single month because we have meetings and we have potential clients and we want to compensate for the lost revenue? How are we going to progress into this? Or are we going to allow for a really clear and well-defined agenda to be set up that is with sustainability in the core of it? We in Plan A believe obviously in the positive change, but there's also a lot of potential for challenges when it comes to having the world going back to basics. And this is where I move to the environmental risks. Going back to normal, and I'm putting, normal as not the normal, it's just that, there's a really funny quote from a friend of a friend that was basically saying, it's really interesting to imagine how the world can get into an economic crisis because of the fact that we stopped consuming useless stuff. Of course, this is an exaggeration of how we actually consume, but it carries a bit of resemblance with some of the consumption patterns we have, because going back to normal after the crisis is, an over-exaggeration on consuming a lot of products, and over-exaggeration on traveling, and also, certainly with the concern for the economic side, which is the second part of my presentation, when you combine the environmental risks with the economic risks, you end up in a situation where essentially we can all be less concerned about what the planet is doing and how the planet is health-wise versus actually what's in our pocket. Because a shocking statistic that I learned yesterday is that, for example, 1 in 10 people in the US has been made redundant, has been made unemployed. So, an opportunity to understand where the environmental risks are deeply aligned with the economic ones. A really big concern, I don't know if many of you heard about the news, but BlackRock has been yesterday appointed as the main contractor for the European Commission to advise them on ESG topics. So this is environmental, social, and governance topics for banks. So what this basically means is that a company like BlackRock that owns a lot in fossil fuels, they have, I think, around $5 billion in fossil fuels, and also in some of the biggest companies around the world, they own another, their portfolio is trillions. It's like 5 trillion or something like that. They're the biggest, basically, investment firm in the world. But the questions that were raised there, and it goes aligned again to this environmental risks topic, is like, how can you give to, how did this woman that, like, she's from an NGO, she said it's like inviting the fox to guard the hen house. So this is the environmental risk side where we, in order for fossil fuel companies to be able to survive well, there's certain dependent companies that could be also embedded, so that, consumption is increasing, and obviously economic output is increasing. As we know, fossil fuels are deeply embedded in every single thing related to production, because you need to distribute these products, you need to run these factories by something. This is an incredible environmental risk, because this means that not only we're going to increase emissions, but we're also going to be, really quickly going back to levels of environmental instability that we don't want to be back after. And interesting, another statistic that you should know is that after every single crisis that had happened, the oil crisis from decades ago, first from the financial crisis, every single time emissions have bounced back and then increased. So there's a huge risk here for the environmental risks, for the environmental side of the story. No shift in air travel behavior. This is one that I totally, unfortunately, I would have to think that it's gonna quadruple. Why I'm saying this is because after they've been captured and they've been in captivity at home for a long time, they would want to see the world, they would want to go on a holiday, they would want to do a lot of things, and business would need to increase the speed of getting deals done. So the opportunities for environmental challenges is against here as well. And finally, behavior changes in consumption and commute. I think this one is more related to the idea, are we actually now using this time that we're sitting at home to analyze our behavior and to also build this mindset into the company, or are we just going to go back to basics and it's like, okay, now we've reduced emissions, let's just think of work as the main dominant factor. What are the economic opportunities? This is kind of a bit of a more interesting combination of facts that, have allowed for us to learn and improve our economy when big challenges for the whole world have happened. The end of feudalism happened after Black Death. Women participation in the workplace happened after the Second World War. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, we totally reshaped transportation and security policies, making it really clear on what is allowed, what isn't allowed. There's no more, kind of excess luggage that is being included that actually increases the emissions of companies traveling. So that it increases the quantity of fuel that is being used. So this is kind of a economic opportunity. Yes, company saves money because they don't use so much fuel, but there's also the second aspect, which is related to reduced emissions, because companies now have aerospace companies have a very strict policy on how they can reshape, how they can get their clients to be on board on a plane. SaaS. So I'm going to make a pop culture reference here. You probably know, a lot of famous influencers have been speaking a lot about the COVID crisis, and some of the biggest ones have also raised a lot of money. There's a prominent Italian one. But one of the biggest challenges in the communication related to, COVID in the beginning was that none of us believed in the severity of the situation. People thought that, oh, this is just like an issue of China. Look at them with their weird wildlife markets. But we forgot about the fact that we live in a world that has no boundaries. So we live in a world that is so connected and is so globalized, not only by technology that is connecting us through internet, but also through transportation and through a lot of other aspects that quite deeply embedded into the way we exist. And the SARS outbreak, SARS was really nasty virus that killed in 2003 a lot of people, significantly less than the amount of people that have been killed by COVID. But what was an interesting outcome of it was that the success of online retail happened then. What this means is that after 2003 was kind of the Renaissance, or the beginning of I would say not the Renaissance, the beginning of online retail. And this is where the e-commerce platform started to flourish. I'll give you the perspective of where, this can also turn into a challenge. From today's perspective, what we see is that we have delayed, we have basically borders that are closed. I just spoke this morning to a sustainable entrepreneur who is now, who has a really cool startup that is producing aluminium bottles, and they use recycled aluminium to produce these bottles. At the moment, their bottles are stuck at the border with Russia, at the Russian border. And they have asked him for a fee of 5,000 euros to keep the items there, or they would basically destroy the products. So here you see, how online retail works, but also we have to consider that there's certain aspects that are also risks within online retail. But what if COVID-19 not only makes us more tech savvy by using tools like, YouTube, Zoom, and then plenty of other whereby and so on, like online conferencing tools, but like, what if we actually finally start distinguishing what is a real priority when it comes to travel? What is a meeting that could have been a phone call? I would think that there should be something more fundamental that changes. And I think this would be something of the size of, these fundamental and so powerful events that are mentioned on this slide. But we're yet to see what's actually going to happen. A second economic opportunity is adaptability. I don't know how many of you are familiar with, mimicking patterns. This is really cool, way in technology that basically uses processes and uses patterns and also materials from nature to essentially be able to get the same equilibrium, the same kind of efficiency in technological hardware and software and so on products. So Adapt by Chameleon is here the idea that, we can go digital, we can use, we can have smart hospitals, we can learn how to reduce office costs, office costs, and we can take risks to test new ideas. Some of the new ideas that we have been looking at with our team is essentially being able to kind of prioritize, like to scrap off useless activities, to be able to understand, where is something a fluff, where is something actually perfectly efficient, so that this kind of symbiosis that you would normally see in nature can also happen within your company. We have proven as humanity through this crisis that adaptability is something we're capable of. We have been able to work really successfully together. Examples of, hotels being transformed into hospitals. Examples of people that are out of work. So, for example, retired doctors have been returned to the German care system. I know this from a friend of mine that is a doctor. This is obviously coming out of a need, but it also shows that we have certain resources that we're not tapping into. So all of these things, essentially, we have to keep in mind, and we have to use this power that we've now untackled and we've been able to unleash to go forward in a sustainable manner, but also one that is also removing anything that is obsolete. There is an incredible study by McKinsey that is called The Next Normal, and it basically speaks about the world post-pandemic and also a world that is hit by a pandemic. And the idea behind the study is that, um, you need to focus on 5 particular areas of activity in order to be the success or the winner of the next normal. And the next normal is essentially going to be this reality where we live in with a lot more precaution than before. We adapt to a reality where maybe certain policies totally change. And of course, in the next normal where the whole world is connected by a particular topic. So the 5 key topics that they focus on are resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, and reform. Resolve relates to essentially being able to untangle these issues that I was speaking of. Resilience is basically building this capacity to stop and to kind of be, strong enough to go through this crisis and then move ahead in a more powerful and strong way. Return is the moment when we kind of go back to, this reality that we remember, but with a different mindset, to then reimagine and reform. And in all of these processes, you can see it's a step-by-step process. We end up essentially building a better and more sustainable future. And in this report, even even though it focuses on a pandemic situation, the emphasis on climate change is so visible. Why? Because it is clear to companies like McKinsey and to companies like BCG and all the other ones that are working on analyzing the current situation and understanding how it's going to affect the world long term, to also think of this hidden rhinoceros that we don't even talk about. And it is, reform means also being sustainable in the way we look at the topic. So let's focus on risks here. One of the risks that is really visible and, I think there's a lot of benefit in actually looking in statistics on websites like worldmeter.org. They have a special section related to coronavirus, because you can actually understand, if you apply your socioeconomical mind, you can understand how, if this scale of intensity of crisis happens on our planet, and it is happening on our planet, there cannot be no repercussions for the economy. Because at the end of the day, workforce, it's not a nice word, but it's still, a valid term, is people. And us drive the economy with small or big acts. Some do it through governmental activities, some do it through their business, others do it through their NGO work, others do it through their policy or activism work. But all of us are pushing towards, an improvement of an ecosystem and economical setup that is potentially going to be satisfying for all of us in the long term. Of course, we can open up a totally different discussion related to this, but why I'm pointing this out is because, the first statement is really powerful. Health crisis turns into a global economic crisis. When you take away so many people from their workspace, another statistics that I learned yesterday or the day before, doesn't really matter, was the fact that 2/3 of jobs are actually not related to being able to work from home. So for those of us or you, that are able to just like open up our computer in a cafe and then switch to our email and then be back on track, this is not the case for many people. There's people in the service industry, like hospitality. There's people in, that work in kindergartens. There's people that work in hospitals. Okay, hospitals are directly related to this crisis, so they're really active at the moment. But 2/3 of our world at the moment has stopped. There's no way in which they can be active. And obviously what this means is that certain outputs that should be there are not there. There's this really shocking photo from China where they show people working with masks, and you see the conditions they have, like 1 by 1 meter space for each one of them. It's a fashion production facility. Only since a few weeks, there's been the possibility in certain states of China to start working again. And for all of us that are concerned about the environmental crisis, of course, you think, oh yeah, there's probably like a benefit from this activity stopping because no one needs these t-shirts at this kind of scale. But you can think also about the households that are affected, that are losing their livelihood, and at the moment with 1 month runway, which is also the case for many. SMEs suffering in extreme cases, shutting down. So that was a really interesting example from the Dutch government. I think, the Dutch government has taken their time to respond to the crisis. And but what has been really interesting is that there's been a lot of solidarity shown by the VC industry, where essentially they demanded from the government to focus on understanding how they can support the startup ecosystem, exactly understanding that there's a really big potential of, shutting down happening. I'll give you another example from a fundraising workshop that was happening with some Berlin VCs, also some Paris VCs, and also London VCs. And they're saying that at the moment, and I'll explain the lingo so that I don't leave anyone out of this discussion. They're saying that some of the companies that they have in their portfolio had calculated they would be getting a revenue for, 9 to 12 months, but because of this crisis now, this has been halved, or even more, like reduced by 9 months. So the company is now left with existence money, money to be able to pay salaries for 3 months. And there's plenty of big examples of companies of big importance and I would say that are pretty famous across the startup sectors that have turned their employees to Kurzarbeit. And these are true challenges for the economic system in which we work, because we need to imagine it as a cycle. Everything, how it works is there's correlations between on one aspect, you produce something, then it gets to be distributed. Every single stakeholder along the way gets some funds, and they pay some people, and these people then help their households. And to then get to this final stakeholder that could be the SME, it could be the startup, we then focus on a lot of unfortunate chances of these companies shutting down. The final two aspects relates to pains and strains on global supply chains. I know from a few companies that sell some drinks and different types of beverages, not only alcohol but also non-alcohol, anything that you can think of. But it was just like kind of a Späti type of a company that basically they have not been able to get orders coming from anywhere different than Germany because there's up to 2 to 3 months delays. So for those of you based in Germany, you can drink but you can't have an orangina or something like that is coming from France. And this is, it's, of course, we adapt our preferences, but we also need to understand that when it comes to the more essential services, some of the shortages that we've been seeing also in supermarkets related to food, pasta, flour, also there's been shortages, again, toilet paper, any kind of toiletries and so on. They are related to the fact that we live in a globalized world where not everything is produced in the country where you live, and there's certainly challenges. There was a really shocking photo from Poland where hundreds of trucks were stuck there because the border closed while these people were traveling to deliver their goods. Panic shopping, I don't even need to tell you this. There's been, I think there's way too many memes and gifs about this, but there was this sense of, I would say, disregard for others sometimes, because people were concerned that they would potentially end up without certain resources for themselves. But yeah, this led to a lot of strains on supermarkets and actually some chains all across Europe, for most prominently France, Switzerland, and the UK actually had to make some really clear messages on social media and on their marketing, any kind of channel that they would use, that you need to stop, buying these products. With this, I would like to finish. I am really happy I was able to chat with you about this and, tell you a bit about this. I would like to open the floor now to questions. My conclusion for this topic is that we're yet to see a lot of changes on this planet, and one of the most prominent ones is the imminent issues that we're facing related to COVID. Thank God many of us are, in a safe setup, in a safe reality, but there's plenty of people that are threatened, and it's not only the old ones, but it's also, a lot of just vulnerable communities, homeless people, people with previous conditions. And it is our responsibility today to think of COVID-19 and also as people concerned about climate change, about these two issues simultaneously. Because if you embed a sustainable behavior today and kind of a mindset that respects nature, you can end up actually preventing with your own behavior a lot of the potential next crises that happen soon. And why I say soon is because the truth is that we have a few kind of hanging over our heads challenges that are ahead of us. There's a potential of a second wave for COVID. There's a potential of, the weather pattern changes that we've been observing in Europe and all across the world happening in the last few years to essentially explode. And none of the changes that have led to temporary reduction in CO2 should let us feel comfortable that, this is enough. So I encourage you now to have, for us to have a discussion. And I'm so grateful for you to care about this topic because I think all of us have heard enough about COVID in the last few months, but we should not forget the big picture also, as time passes. I'm open now for questions.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mariana. I'm head of events at Plan-A, and I will be moderating your questions. Thank you so much for the number of questions that we actually received in, with Sli.do. And well, I'll start with the most, the heavy voted one. If many companies are financially stricken by COVID-19, is there still a budget for emission reductions?
So this is a really good question to all of those that voted it up. Well done. How we think about carbon reduction in Plan-A is about carbon reduction is not only, the emissions side of things. It's also about embedding a sustainable mindset in companies. And what we do with our software that, for those of you that don't know, is focused on helping companies calculate, monitor, and reduce their emissions, is that we embed this mindset through all the activities that you can use on the platform. And what I find, particularly exciting by the companies that we work with is that you don't need to spend money on your, changing behavior, but you should start talking openly in your company about these things. So as long as there's a prominent player in the green movement discussion in your company, you would end up reaching these goals just because the behaviors have changed. I'll give you a post. Introducing a cycle to work policy in the company that doesn't need to be funded by the company, but just requires a universal acceptance that this is the way to go going forward, allows for 100% reduction in commute CO2 emissions. Switching to a green energy provider is also another example where you can be really good and really effective with your CO2 emissions, and it just requires you to basically have a process, to go through the process, to be focused on getting the this process in place and this kind of new way of working with energy embedded into your system. So I would say as long as there's an ambitious person on doing this in the company, and I encourage all of you that are green, green team managers within their companies, just reach out to me directly. I'm more than happy to have a chat with each one of you. It's not about putting you on a platform necessarily. It's just about helping you get the message across. The first and foremost thing that is related to Plan A is, we are true to our cause. We don't do any greenwashing. We don't do any, lying around about how much our commitment is. This is what we've been doing for years now. And so I would say, as long as there's a person pushing the agenda, there's a way to go. Because, final thing, our platform actually calculates your cost reduction capabilities with CO2. This could be a good selling point as well.
Thank you very much. The second question here, and it's a very good one. Through Plan A, you have the chance to be in contact with many companies. Has there been a change in interest into carbon offsetting?
Carbon offsetting is a bit of a challenging topic. Why? Not all of our customers do carbon offsetting, and this is not because we have a very particular and stringent process related to offsetting. So our wonderful head of projects, Amy, she has established a very strict methodology on how we select projects. So we select projects that are incredibly transparent about how they do the offsetting. They're project owners, so there's no middleman. They get the money in full, and also there is like a really effective technology being used to reduce CO2 emissions. I don't think companies are more interested in offsetting. Companies are interested in being sustainable, and this is essentially embedded into this idea of long-term thinking related to how the company is going to behave, because offsetting is really great activity, but if only put in combination with other activities. So yeah, I would say, there's interest, but not more than the usual. And for us, what we notice a lot is companies actually want to be sustainable themselves, because they see the long-term benefits of this, not only from getting more customers, but also from being able to connect to like-minded companies. We have a community of the companies that we work with, and what's really important about them is connecting to one another, because this gives them kind of access to this special green club that you can't just find anywhere.
Thank you. The moment we can show the ill effects of something on people's health, governments start to notice. How can we do this effectively for the climate change agenda?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. The moment we can show the ill effects of something on people's health, governments start to notice. How can we do this effectively for the climate change agenda? How can we show governments?
What a wonderful question. Thank you so much for this question. So there's a calculation that just by the fact that CO2 emissions have dropped by 25% in China within a quarter, there's been around 4 million people being safe from dying from respiratory diseases that are totally unrelated to COVID. What this means is that basically air pollution is so deeply entrenched into the atmosphere of China that by having this like strong drop in emissions, you basically end up having, CO2 emission reduction that is, also leading to saving people's lives. There's a challenge at the moment with the fact that there's a lot of panic. The panic may be settling, but the truth is that because the summer is coming, I mean, I see way too many people that are not following the social distancing guidelines from the government outdoors in Berlin. But I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to climate change is that we're talking about 20 to 30 year horizon about some of the issues. So I wish for us to be able to communicate correlations between issues, because COVID is like really straightforward. Person, there's the virus, and then there's a unifying aspect of all of these people, and then the response is obviously unified as well. On the other hand, if you look at climate change, what is not unifying about climate change is the fact that you have so many small contributing factors that lead to challenges to the environmental system. And what this means is that basically, you know, you have air pollution that is leading to, you know, people having diseases. You have, you know, deforestation that is killing whole ecosystems, leading to loss of habitat for animals. You have loss of habitat of animals, leading to species going extinct. So it's a big chunk of issues you need to put together. So what I would wish and what we try to do, and I think we're pretty good with, is with our academy, is basically making it a bit more clear of what are the correlations between issues, and also explaining, you know, how this bulk actually leads to one end that is not positive. So I would say we need to start focusing on understanding these correlations, and we do as Plan A our best to speak with policymakers, speak with companies, speak with individuals at our events that Mariana wonderfully organizes, and yeah, to kind of empower everyone to understand that there's a lot that needs to be done, and we just need to start being responsible ourselves, and then a lot is going to change.
Thank you very much. Next question. Do you think the experience of COVID-19 helps push for more radical measures, or everyone will be too exhausted? It proves radical and fast change is possible.
This is the first time in history for those of us that have not lived more than 30 years on this planet to actually see an event which leads to governmental response that is so severe. I know horrendous stories from my grandparents from, like, you know, World War situations where obviously, you know, it's a totally different situation where you're going to be mobilized to actually go on the front rather than mobilized to stay in on your sofa. What my hope is that these 10 countries that I mentioned in the beginning, that at the moment are connecting to one another to speak openly about this need to step an agenda for a sustainable future post-COVID, are going to be the leading driving forces behind an agenda that can satisfy all of us, especially, you know, the ones of us that are actively fighting climate change for years. And I would say radical measures help a lot, but climate change, unfortunately, has been politicized for a long time. And once the decision-making for climate change is being made, what basically happens is that there's a lot of calculations related to who has lobbied the government. Oh, it's some fossil fuel companies, some NGOs, some this and this and this. And the decision-making is prolonged. So I would say COVID is our chance to start thinking differently, but I'm not super positive about what is going to be the response of the government, because I think their focus is going to be on economic growth.
Okay, thank you. And do you see any different pathways that developing and developed countries could potentially follow?
Do I see a different pathway for developed countries to follow?
Yeah, like what's
can you say it again? Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Do you see any different pathways that developing and developed countries could potentially follow?
So this question is quite open. So I would start with obviously focusing on COVID. So it's really challenging to observe how actually COVID hit, you know, the developed world. The US is growing by 20,000 cases a day. This is mind-blowing, you know. They managed to surpass in deaths Italy, that, as we know, has been hit so hard, and they've been so incredible in terms of their positive response on organizing themselves. Europe's pathway to get out of this crisis is to start working together on other topics as well. I see a lot of potential in Europe becoming, you know, really unified in the way they look at the Green New Deal for Europe, in the way they look at policies related to companies, because there's a lot of discussion at the moment, and a lot of incredible organizations are using this moment to push these kinds of policies to be put in the prime. And this is related to wildlife protection, it's related to deforestation, it's related to oil companies and how they're being taxed, it's related to carbon taxing. And all of this is available. Please feel free to reach out to Plan A if you want to find any of these links. So I see a lot of potential in this, and I can already see a lot of, I keep on using this example, but I was so happy today to see it related to these 10 countries connecting to this open letter. This is the positive possibility. The negative possibility in terms of, how we go forward is that there's going to be a panic response where essentially we move forward into, okay, there's no more COVID. Now we're opening, restaurants, bars, boundaries, and so on. And we end up in a chaotic situation that seems a bit unmanaged because everyone is focused on their own little, having a vision only amongst themselves, having a vision only about their own future, and they're concerned about their own future. When it comes to the developing world, I think it's really great that there hasn't been such a severe situation in many of these countries, in terms of numbers, just because it's really difficult to imagine how, a country like the size of India would be protected. Information travels in totally different patterns. It's not by, Googling stuff. There's people that don't have access to internet. There's people that don't have access to any kind of, telecom device. And having these people informed about the way they should behave could be really challenging. So how they should go forward is, I think, there's been, we have Vamsi from our team that is from India, and he was telling me really interesting stories with regards to how the government has responded. And I think, they had two particular cases in India that led to a lot of challenges and a lot of outbreaks, mini outbreaks of COVID-19. One was related to a religious pilgrimage that happened from Bangladesh, where essentially a lot of people got COVID because there was just, no limitation, and this was related to a religious commitment. So obviously you're not going to stop anyone if they're coming in, kind and positive way. But this led to a big outbreak. The second one was a group of Italian people. This was the first one that led to a lot of, cases. 15 people basically traveled to India, and after that, the borders totally closed to everyone from Europe. I think the developed world has an opportunity to set the scene also for their expectations regarding, trade. I think China, really quickly learned of how they can mobilize, and they've been applauded for how good they've been for 7 days to build 1 million beds worth of hospital space, and this kind of activities. But my wish would be for, and my hope, it's not a wish, it's like, I would hope that they would have the courage to request from the Western world to establish certain, patterns related to sustainability. It's still difficult to imagine what is going to happen. In terms of a negative possibility, there could be an outbreak, but we cannot predict this, and I don't even want to talk about this because I don't want to jinx it. I hope it doesn't happen at all.
Okay, we have a second question that is related to the same topic. I'll just read the final question in the question. Do developing countries have a better opportunity here because of the rate of transmission? Do they have a better opportunity, in your opinion?
I think there's both opportunity and risk. Opportunity comes from the fact that we are going to be battling the repercussions of this crisis for a long time in Europe. And this is not me being negative, just me being realistic and having Grundkenntnisse and beyond about economics. There's certain things that need to be changed and certain aspects that would, have to be the focus of the government in order for people to not be left homeless and also to not be left without any income. The developing world has a massive opportunity to position themselves as the driving force of not only a sustainability agenda, but also the ones that would be, producing in a better way, the ones that would be positioning themselves as kind of a driving force behind the COP meetings. For example, COP26 was now cancelled, but I would so see it how, you know, countries that are maybe not at the prime at the moment in the decision making place themselves there because they have more headspace to think about these issues, because they're not as concerned about their economies as Europe is, because Europe is totally kind of concerned, I would say, and blocked in this very moment.
I have a question here that is completely out of this spectrum, and I find it really, really nice. Is it finally time to turn around how we measure economic growth and assign value to household work, caregiving, etc.? Also include measures of people health. I know that Amy will love this question. So
I love this question as well. There's been a lot of discussions about changing the economic metrics and essentially using KPIs that are not only GDP, but also focusing on CO2 emissions, and actually CO2 emissions not only produced within a singular country, but also CO2 emissions that are the result of a country producing somewhere else. So imagine it, for example, German companies ordering stuff in China. This is also a responsibility of Germany. This kind of, you know, discussions have been happening. And to answer the question, absolutely, you know, if there's a possibility for someone to, you know, implement this overnight, we are going to live in a lot better world already from tomorrow, even though we're facing and we're living in a crisis moment at the moment. But yeah, I would say this is a reality that I really look forward to. And I also have been working with regards to, I don't know if some of you follow the St. Gallen Symposium, which is really interesting, you know, set of events that happen around the world, but they're really actively focused on talking about these things. So go on their channels and find a lot of their content about, you know, accounting systems that embed environmental issues, and also check out the donut model. This is a new model that has been developed in Oxford that focuses on basically setting up an agenda that focuses on the socio-economical issues, but also understands the environmental boundaries and risks that can happen if you don't limit yourself within the donut. So yeah.
For the final 3 questions, and thank you, Euridice, for this question. This is a perfect moment for companies like Plan A to step in and bring on the table the climate change topic. How is Plan A changing its communication strategy?
Plan A has not changed its communication strategy. We have a responsibility to the topic of climate change. So we're just continuing with our positive messaging that is focused on educating companies and also educating employees about the benefits of being in a sustainable company. I would say that, you know, what we definitely have been doing since the beginning is to make sure that we don't shift attention fully to COVID, which is what many companies have chosen as a content strategy, because it really makes you challenged on how you can be pushing forward some of your agendas if you fully, I mean, Plan A is a company that has been started and is still ongoing with a mission that is focused on making companies and individuals empowered by data related to climate change. And we do this and we battle daily basis through all the content that comes out on the Academy, all the events that we organize, all of the companies that we onboard on our platform. And it really is important to stay focused. So this is our strategy. And what we do is we make sure that we communicate a lot more the cost saving and cost reduction aspects that being sustainable has, because obviously now this is the king, this is the topic of the day.
Thank you. As you explained, COVID-19 is having a huge impact, positive impact on climate change. How can we talk about this impact without appearing hugely insensitive?
It's really important to be trusting and also communicating facts. I don't think this is a topic where opinions or emotions help. COVID-19 is something really tangible. We can see how many people have died. We can see how many people have recovered. We can see how many vaccines are in the process of being developed. And if we are true to the facts, we also need to understand how this kind of an event that is so encapturing, it's so universal to everyone on this planet, is also affecting us in different ways, you know? Do we talk enough about, you know, the fact that there's, you know, people that have never been connected to one another that all of a sudden are joining events from all around the world in the same space that would never have happened if we only had these, you know, physical events? Do we also speak about the negative side, that there's a lot of loneliness happening at the moment because we're all like confined by these four walls that we have? And for some that by themselves, maybe it leads to, you know, feeling like you don't connect, feeling like you don't belong, feeling like you've lost your community. For anyone that is fair to the facts, you would also consider all the aspects of the story. And one of the main aspects for people like us that focus on fighting climate change is the idea that we are truly concerned by the fact where this came from. This virus didn't come from like this, all of these like conspiracy theories that are like, oh, it was developed in a Chinese factory as a chemical weapon. No, it was basically us being irresponsible yet again in terms of how we handle nature, because these animals belong to places where they are born. They don't belong in cages. They don't belong in a market. So this is one aspect that needs to be openly discussed. And I don't think this is insensitive in any way. And the second aspect is to also consider the fact that, you know, climate change has not disappeared. The fact that we have something else on the agenda that captures the full attention of news anchors doesn't mean that all of a sudden climate change became non-existent. It was really powerfully mentioned by Ban Ki-moon today. It's saying that basically this pandemic is far from over, and it has already brought certain truths that are, you know, related to the fact that viruses don't, you know, respect borders, that there's a need for solidarity, there's a need to defeat this pandemic and, you know, any kind of crisis that we face at the moment, that we need to take care of our vulnerable people, that we need to start facing and working with the facts and scientific knowledge. And, you know, that being delayed is deadly, because the US is a great example of this. And he speaks about this, and then he finishes his speech saying, you know, all the things that I just said to you now, apply them to climate change and see what happens. It's fully, fully true. And, you know, thank you so much for this question to this person that, you know, put it there, because we really need to be respectful to how challenging the situation is, but we also need to think of the fact that nothing else has changed. We just stopped traveling for a long time, you know, and there's some reduction in emissions, but climate change is waiting around the corner.
Thank you. And for the final question, people feel they have to make a sacrifice regarding sustainability. How to make them realize what have they gained, or does our planet, for this crisis, from this crisis?
I think the sense of sacrifice comes from the fact that we're a bit spoiled. There's this aspect that you need to have resources the moment when you think of them. You want to go to a restaurant, you're going to be able to open the door and then, you know, enter it. When it comes to sustainability, I think we've been spoiled by certain mindset frames that have been embedded in our mind through a lot of marketing, through a lot of, you know, structures and slivers of, you know, evidence that was not really true evidence, that explains to us that we are consumers. And the truth about sustainability is that there's a necessity for you to live in equilibrium with this planet and the ecosystem in which you're part of. We totally forgot about this. So this sacrifice feeling comes from the fact that we forgot about this. So to these people, I would say, you know, first of all, start testing yourselves. If you find that, you know, okay, this is like a cool trend that I'm not sure if I want to be part of, make a test, you know, do one day when you eat vegan, do another day when you actually cycle. It's perfectly sunny outside. Use this opportunity to kind of consider taking this instead of a taxi. And make a note of all these, like, you know, sensations that you have when you're doing these things. And then obviously, you know, connect to like-minded humans that can allow you to understand their ways of going through it. I can say personally for myself, I changed my life a lot with Plan A, and it has been truly, you know, interesting journey, because I stopped eating meat. I barely buy anything. I haven't bought any clothes in, I mean, I have some, as you can see, but I don't buy any new clothes in, you know, in the same way that I did in the past. And it came so naturally, because then the first thing that pops into your mind is the respect for nature. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to buy a new t-shirt. It's like 1,200 liters of water. 1,200 liters of water. Are you kidding me? I mean, when you know these facts, you kind of end up developing a sense of urgency. And I think it becomes a lot easier to be sustainable. And if someone is still challenged, just say hi to anyone from the Plan A team. We're a bunch of positive and nice humans. I think plenty of ways we can tell you that you hold the power to become sustainable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lubomila and Factory, for this wonderful event. Thank you for all the participants. We are going to email you tomorrow with a lot of links and from the presentation that you just saw. And yeah, follow us in our social media. We're going to have 3 events related to climate change and COVID-19 from now on, from now until the middle of May. And we hope that you can actually participate on those too. We're going to bring in new information every time. And that's it from us. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you Plan A for hosting this. It was really interesting to learn about how we can adapt to these new and just unbelievable times. We have a lot more content coming online, which would be relevant to you. So please check us out. You can follow us and find us at factoryberlin.com, and you can also follow and find Plan A at plana.earth. Thank you very much.